that truth is true everywhere. It's not only truth in one place, it's true above and below, it's true east and west. So therefore, the Torah needs to be consistent with the world because the truth of the Torah permeates everything in the world. And last week, the first week we talked about work, how work is actually not a necessary evil, but it's part of the divine plan that God had in helping him, because that's what he chose, make this world a dwelling place, make it a godly garden. And it's not only through prayer and through study, but it's also through being at work and seeing the divine providence, doing it correctly. That's part of the mission. Last week we spoke about Shalom Bayit, happy, peaceful relationships. And in this class, we're going to be talking about wholesome health. And in wholesome health as well, we find that the same principles of the truth of the Torah and the truth of the divine permeates every aspect. Now, I want to set the tone correctly. When we talk about health, there are different levels of talking about health. On one extreme, you have people that get sick and they have diseases and they have serious illnesses and they have a big challenge in handling life because of the illness. In some cases, an illness might be what we call a handicap. It doesn't let them do what they were doing, or at least they feel that they can't do it in the right way. So it gets in the way, and the question is, how do they continue having a positive attitude? There's another thing about health, which is the idea of having a positive attitude in a preventive way. In fact, today, there's a tremendous amount of emphasis on preventative care. It's again ringing. Preventative care and how we should live a healthy lifestyle in order to be able to avoid many of the illnesses that befall people. But we want to see it from the perspective of Judaism. And I want to say another thing about the Rebbe, that just as we saw in previous videos that there were many cases where people would ask questions for advice in work or advice in family life, it was actually even more so when it came to health. And there are books published today with excerpts of the Rebbe's responses in writing that he wrote to people who turned to him with questions for advice and how to deal with medicine. We're not going to go into all of it today. I might bring up some of them as examples. So in order to set the tone, and this is true for everybody that's online and everybody that's here, and that's the following. The human being is made up of a body and a soul. If you take a census out there for most religious people, I'm talking about religious people, people that are pursuing spirituality, they will ask you, is the body a contradiction to the soul? By the way, what do you guys think? Is the body a contradiction to the soul? I'm not asking you to give me a utopia answer. I'm asking you to give me an answer just in the way you see things.
I think it is.
You think it is?
It can be.
It can be. Any other answers? What? Okay, we're going to get there. So
It's complementary.
it's complementary. Those are all correct answers. One of the biggest struggles that people that want to pursue God have is how not to allow the body to impede their spiritual pursuit. So the attitude for many people is that the physical activities that we engage in is a necessary evil. You have no choice. You have to you have to eat. So therefore you eat. But the eating itself is not necessarily a holy act. You have people getting married. Yeah. I'd rather be married to God and not be married to someone else. So then I can be totally devoted. And there are some religions that their philosophy and theology work that way, that they believe being married to God and being married to another human being is considered to be an obstruction or a necessary evil, but it's not the proper way to do it. So that's one attitude. Another attitude is that they're complementary, which was just said before. But even when you say it's complementary, basically you're talking about two separate entities that have their own interests, and the interests are competing interests. And as a result, because the interests are competing interests, so therefore you have to find a way how to braid them together, fuse them together, so that they should be able to be at peace with each other. Give you an example. Let's take people that need to wear corrective lenses in order to be able to see. At some stage in their age, when they go to the ophthalmologist will say, I think that your eyes are in such a way that you need to have bifocals, because when you read, you need to have one prescription, and when you look out, you need to have another prescription. So that's why most people over the age of 40 or 50, if they're wearing corrective lenses, are prescribed with bifocals. The concept of bifocals is it's two visions. There's the upper vision, which is one way of seeing things, and the lower vision. And it's all in one glasses. It's not like you're wearing two pairs of glasses. It's one pair of glasses. I'm wearing bifocals right now. So when I read, if I'm going to read with my regular lenses, I won't be able to see it. So I need to have a different prescription. So bifocals means that there are two visions, and the two visions are fused together. And that is the conventional Jewish way of looking at the body and the soul. They each have their own interest, but we have to fuse them together so that they can live in harmony one with another. The Rebbe was a novel approach which had nothing to do with bifocals. It was unifocals. The Rebbe didn't agree with bifocals. The Rebbe didn't see a contradiction of the body and the soul. He saw it all as one. It's just that it expresses itself in different ways, but it's all really one. The body and the soul are not a contradiction. It's not only that they complement each other, but it's two unique expressions of God that God intended that there should be heaven and earth, so there should also be the body and the soul. And we're going to see this in the first text. And the reason we're reading this is because this is very much connected to the issue of health, because health is all about the body. I'm going to speak about spiritual health. We'll speak about physical health. So open up your book to page 61 and look at text 1. This is taken from the writings of the previous Rebbe, but the Rebbe compiled it in a book called Hayom Yom, which was a daily calendar that every day there's a particular thought. So what the Rebbe says here in text 1, page 61 is, there is a school of teaching that promotes the predominance of form over matter. Now, the concept of form over matter, everyone agrees that form is over matter. It expounds on the unique quality of the material now, let me just talk about this. Form over matter. What does form over matter mean? Give you a very simple example. Let's say you need to buy a car. The purpose of the car is to get you from one destination to another destination. So what is the function of the car? Transportation, right? So the form of the car is transportation. The matter of the car is the material of the car. Now, no one is debating whether one should have a decent vehicle for transportation and that it should be comfortable. The question is, where do you put the emphasis? Some people put the emphasis on the matter. They want to have a nice car with the best seats and the nice tires and the snazzy look. That's what's important to them. So they're putting matter over form. But if you're putting form, which is transportation, then you look to see, is this a transportation that will fit your needs or not? The matter is only there to serve the form. The same thing is true in anything that we see in life. Same thing with the body and soul. The body is the matter, the soul is the form. The body in its own is just matter. Matter without form has no meaning. So for that reason, every spiritualist will tell you that you have to promote the predominance of form over matter. And then he continues on. It expounds on the unique quality of the material when it is purified, and the unique quality of form when integrated with the material. They're two to be so thoroughly now. That is the general conventional wisdom, that you're taking two opposites and you're fusing them together. But that's only if you see them as two when you're wearing bifocals, as I mentioned before. But if you're wearing unifocals, you come to a different conclusion. And what is that? I know it sounds a little philosophical, but it goes to the very heart of what we're discussing. He says language here that is very unique. The two are to be so thoroughly fused that one cannot detect where either of them begins or ends. For their beginning is wedged in their end, and their end is beginning, their end is into their beginning. What does that mean? Sounds philosophical. So when you take a regular approach that we talked till now, you talk about the body and the soul as two distinct entities that might even clash with each other, and you fuse them together. So you know good and well what is a physical activity that nurtures the body, and what is a spiritual activity that nurtures the soul. And even though you bring it together, but you can still distinguish them. That's because you see them as two entities that were woven together. But if you see it as one entity and not two, it's just one entity that's refracted into, like if you see sunlight coming through glass, half the glass is green and half the glass is red, and the sun comes in, on one side of the room it's green, and one side of the room it's red. Will anyone envision it's two different sources of light, or it's different kind of lights? You know it's the same light. It just projects itself in one place in green and one place in red. What the Rebbe is trying to say here is, don't look as the body and the soul as two separate entities that have to come together and woven together. They're actually one. And they're so connected that you don't know where one starts and where it ends. Which means to say that sometimes a physical activity is the most spiritual deed. And sometimes a spiritual deed can be the most physical deed. And we're going to see some examples. Why is that? Because the one God created them both for one purpose, to reveal the light of holiness of his hidden power. Only both of them together can complete the perfection desired by the Creator. This is the school of the teaching of Hasidus, which means to say that the physical and spiritual are not only they're inseparable, they're actually one entity, but they're expressed in the creation as two opposites when they're really one. Which means to say, when Maimonides says in his famous laws that one has to have a healthy body in order to have a healthy soul, most people translate it because if the body is not healthy, it becomes an obstacle for the soul to be able to understand godliness, right? So the body is there as a vessel holding the soul, and that's why you need to have a healthy body. According to what the Rebbe is saying here, is not so. The healthy body, that's part of the spiritual duty. That's part of the spirituality. It's not considered to be something separate from the spiritual. And we're going to see how it displays itself. So we're going to see that the spiritual health and the physical health are integrated because they're really one. So we're going to take it step by step. This is just the general introduction. So here you have, if you look at the screen, to summarize, the Rebbe saw no separation between the spirituality and the physicality. This inherent unity directs the Rebbe's medical advice. So it's not two separate things that, unfortunately, we have to glue together, but rather it's all one. And therefore, in every activity of this physical, you see the spiritual, and in every activity, the spiritual, you see the physical, but it's really one. And that's going to give us the sort of the guideline for it. So let's start with this.
Rabbi, may I ask, are you saying that if you're spiritually unwell, that can lead to physical illness and vice versa?
Absolutely. You'll see that. It's going to come out very clear in tonight's class. Very, very clear. Okay. The Rebbe constantly championed the idea of people being optimistic and hopeful, even when they face medical challenges. Now, why is that? Because remember, we talked all time about the interplay between the spiritual and the physical. It's not two separate things, it's all one. So therefore, in order for there to be physical health, there has to be spiritual health. In order for there to be spiritual health, there has to be physical health. Now, what's the definition of spirituality and godliness? Happiness. It says God does not dwell either in people that have big egos or people that are depressed. That's why Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi writes in the Tanya that depression in Judaism is just as serious and just as harmful as idol worship. We all know idol worship is the sin number one in Judaism, and Jews are ready to die for it. And Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi says that depression is the same. We're not talking about clinical depression where a person has to take medicine. We're talking about people that that's their default. They fall into depression. And we're not going to go into that right now, why it is. I remember reading a story when I was a young boy. I used to read a lot of stories from the old country, all written in Yiddish. And this is a story of a chassid that one night he was studying in the middle of the night Kabbalah, and all of a sudden he saw an image of a person sitting next to him. And the person looked like a rabbi with a big white beard and shiny eyes and looked scholarly. And as soon as he saw the face, the rabbi student, went and extinguished the light and went to sleep. And later, the next day, he told the story. So they asked him, if such a special rabbi came to visit you, maybe he was going to share secrets of the Torah with you. He said, I know, but I looked at his face and he looked despondent. He looked sad. He looked depressed. So I knew that it was negative energy. And I didn't want to have any of the negative energy. Because spirituality displays itself in happiness, which means that you always have to have a happy spirit. And because of that, even when someone is faced with a challenging situation where they're ill or they have some bad news that their physician has given them, the Rebbe would focus on the good energy. And he would say the following, remember we spoke about the fact that you look in a mirror, you look in the body of water, and the face you give God, that's the face that God gives you. Our efforts and positivity elicit positive healing energies from above. What is the source for that? So let's look at page 62, text 2. This is a letter that the Rebbe wrote to somebody that was writing about some major illnesses that he had. And the Rebbe writes the following: I believe I told you in the past that the Holy Zohar, the Zohar is one of the earliest writings of Kabbalah, volume 3, page 184b states that when a person in this physical world has radiant countenance, they are joyful, they thereby draw down upon themselves responses of the same positive kind from heaven. This provides us with an even better understanding of the aphorism of our holy Rebbes, Tracht gut wird sein gut. Think positively and you will see positive results. I'll talk about that a little later. It's a story with the third Chabad Rebbe. May God grant you success in this, so you shall be able to share positive news. So this Kabbalistic concept is that we are in charge of the energy that is directed to us. And if we are positive, the energy that comes to us is positive. And even if we face a difficult challenge, we can still be positive. We'll soon see some of the ways that the Rebbe said it. One of the first things that the Rebbe said in the earlier years is in regards to Israel, because over there the hospital has a name. How do you say a hospital in Hebrew? Bet. You're right. Bet, but how would they say? Bet Cholim. What is Bet Cholim? The house of the sick. And the Rebbe was actually on a campaign to change the name in Hebrew and call it Bet Refuah, a house of healing. A doctor in Hebrew is called what? Rofei. Rofei means a healer. And the doctor is in a hospital. So why are you calling it a house for the sick? When you say the house for the sick, This is how it was in the Middle Ages. If somebody got sick and they thought that he had a contagious disease, they would put them in isolation and they would segregate the person, and they have no remedies for him, and either he would survive or not. But it was basically an environment of sick. The Rebbe wanted the hospital to be a positive place because they're coming there to be healed. And we will soon see how the Rebbe actually, and I want to say there are several videos, they only show one, but there are videos that I've seen where the big hospital in Netanya today, the Laniado Hospital, is called the Healing Center. They changed the name because the founders of the hospital and the managers of the hospital had once come to the Rebbe to discuss some fundraising projects that they had. And the first thing the Rebbe said is change the name of your facility. And they changed it. It's called Bet Refuah. And they have other names as well. It's not just semantics. This is something which is the idea of positive energy. So the Rebbe wanted Beit Refuah, a home for healing. Let's give a look, a letter that the Rebbe wrote to a very prestigious physician in Israel by the name of Dr. Mordechai Shani. He was the recipient of the Israel Prize in 2009. He's a professor of healthcare systems at the Tel Aviv University. We're going to see a video of him towards the end of the program tonight. He speaks in Hebrew, but you will see the subtitles in English. So the Rebbe writes the following. You could read it in Hebrew and English, but we're going to read it in English. I certainly recall that when you paid a visit here together with your colleagues, we had an in-person meeting. I hope that you similarly recall my suggestion at the meeting. He will say later that he came for Simchat Torah with a whole delegation of the Israelis, and the Rebbe asked each one who they are and what their profession is. And when he said that he's the head of a hospital, the Rebbe spoke to him about this. The Rebbe said, instead of referring to the hospital in Hebrew as Bet Cholim, an institution for the sick, it should be called Bet Refuah, an institution for healing. One might consider the semantics a meaningless exchange of terms, but in fact, this change alone is sufficient to offer encouragement to those that are in need of healing. Most importantly, this upgrade in title better highlights the institution's true goals. Its purpose is to bring healing, and wherever possible, complete healing. So why persist in referring to this institution with a title does not fit its purpose? So that is number one in the idea of having a positive attitude, positive that God is the healer, and we will soon see what the doctor's role is. So that's number one, that's very important. Secondly, remember we talked about in the first lesson that work is not a necessary evil, but work is part of the divine plan. In Job, there's a pasuk, a verse that says, Adam la'amal yulad. What does that mean? A person for labor, for toil, was created, was born. In other words, that's the way to be productive. Sometimes when a person gets ill, they don't feel productive anymore. They can't do anything. Here's a story with Rabbi Joseph Telushkin. I think it's a pretty famous story, but this is an interview that he gave, which I think
Rabbi Joseph Telushkin is a rabbi, lecturer, and best-selling author. His father, Shlomo Telushkin, served as the accountant for Merkos Linyonei Chinuch, the educational arm of Chabad Lubavitch.
My father had a lot of nachas, a lot of pleasure from his career as an accountant. He never made a tremendous amount of money. He always made enough. We always lived well. But his pleasure derived from the fact that he worked for organizations that he felt passionately attached to. Chabad, he had a very strong feeling for, but he was also Mizrahi because my father was a Zionist. He also was the accountant for the revisionists and for an organization called Ezra Torah. Ezra Torah, headed by Rav Henkin, which helped Talmidei Chachamim who were in need. So he had a lot of pleasure from the work he was doing. But as he got older, he started gradually to semi-retire and gave up his other accounts. The only account he always kept was the account for Chabad and Merkaz. And in 1986, I at the time was living in Israel, and I got a phone call from my mother that my father had had a stroke. And I immediately flew back. And my mother had somewhat underplayed how serious it was. She just said to me I should come home immediately, but not wanting to make me even more nervous. My father really at first was hovering between life and death, and he was not conscious for several days. And I came back, and every day we would get 2 phone calls, usually from Rabbi Krinsky from the office. The Rebbe wants to know how your father is, and I would report it. And then on maybe the second day or so that I was back, my father came out of his unconsciousness. He was still in ICU in the intensive care unit, and he was a little befuddled. It was, in a sense, my father at the time was 80, and it was very sad. He had always been in very good health. And as I said, he was continuing his work as an accountant, and he always had great pleasure. On Shabbos, he used to give a weekly shiur in Talmud. And my father's life, to some extent, was like a person running full speed ahead who runs into a brick wall, because all of a sudden in one day he could no longer do his work, and he really couldn't learn in any systematic way. His mind would go in and out of being confused, but we would continue to get these calls twice daily. And then one day, about 5 days after my father had come out of his unconsciousness, I pick up the phone, and it was Rabbi Krinsky. And this time, though, he has a question. The Rebbe has an accounting question for your father. So I said to him, but Rabbi Krinsky, you know how sick my father is? And he said, yes, we had a meeting of the leadership today, and an accounting issue came up, and the Rebbe said, ask Shlomo. And, we said, we mentioned your father's illness, and the Rebbe said, I know, ask Shlomo. And so at that point, of course, I took down the question exactly as it was posed. I brought it into my father, and he was able to answer it. And this was an extremely moving event for me, because I realized there was the Rebbe in his office in Brooklyn with tremendous responsibilities for many things all over the world. And he was thinking about my father's situation, lying there in a hospital bed, probably feeling fairly useless. And he came up with a question that my father was able to answer. And I know it immediately made my father feel much better. I mean, my father looked at me and he said, yeah, do this, this, this. And this had an enormous impact on me, this incident, because it's what really made me aware, to a remarkable extent, of the Rebbe, who had assumed these international leadership roles and yet remained focused on the individual.
What we take out of this class is that part of the healing is to remain productive. And I mentioned before the verse from Job, that the human being is born to toil. So if a person has to have what's called sipuk hanefesh. But you know what sipuk hanefesh means? Satisfaction of the soul. They have to feel that they have a purpose, they have a meaning, they're doing something. It's not only about what they're getting. And for that reason, the Rebbe said not only to be positive, but to further produce. And there are many stories of that, of course, if somebody was physically unable, the Rebbe would say, so find another way and don't do that, but see what you can do. But just lying there and vegetating because you're feeling sad for yourself, that is very, very destructive. The next thing is even more interesting, and that is identifying the mission. This is something which the Rebbe specialized in. So let me give a little bit of an introduction to this, and then we'll read what he says. Because the Rebbe believed that nothing happens by chance. The concept of divine providence means that everything has a purpose. Everything is created by God, and everything is sustained by God. Both the creation and sustenance is by God. So even challenges that we have to our life come from God as well. And we don't always know the reason for it. But if a person ends up with an illness and they end up in a hospital, there must be divine providence there. And until they find the divine providence, they won't be able to find healing. And there are numerous stories of that. So first, let's see what the Rebbe says, and then we'll actually see a video about that. Page 65. This is another response, written response to someone. The Rebbe wrote it in Hebrew, but we have the translation. You wrote, request a blessing for your health. an auspicious occasion, I will mention you for a blessing in this regard at the burial site of my esteemed father-in-law, the saintly Rebbe. This was something the Rebbe would do quite often. He would take all the prayer notes and take it to his father-in-law's burial place, and he would read the notes there and ask for blessings. It is the nature and hereditary reality of all Jews to believe in God. What is necessary, however, is for each Jewish individual to allow their inherent faith to actively influence their thought processes through the day. In other words, we need to actively seek to identify the divine providence in each occurrence and in each feature of our daily experience. Although God's providence hides behind the screen that we refer to as nature, we must recognize the truth. As long as we have not yet identified this point of divine providence in any particular event or reality, we have not yet truly understood that event or reality. So in other words, if something happens, it's for a cause. You're going to see a story soon of the editor of a very famous Jewish newspaper that had a stroke, but there was another story with him as well before that he once had a foot infection and they couldn't figure out what his ailment was. And he wrote to the Rebbe, this is what the Rebbe answered: when you'll realize the divine providence, then you will be better. So he asked a nurse or his wife or one of his children to put him in a wheelchair and wheel him down the hall. And he went into one room and he met an old man lying in bed. And they started to speak in Yiddish. And the old man in bed said, "I'm an unbeliever. I don't want to hear from anybody. To go out. You're a man with a beard. You're a man of faith. I don't want to talk to you." So he says, "You don't want to speak to a journalist?" He says, "You're a journalist?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "I'm the editor of the Tag Morgen Journal." Later he became of the Allgemeine Journal. It was a very famous Yiddish paper. The guy says, "I read it every day." She says, "Your name must be Jacobson. He said, "That's me." So his attitude changed. Anyways, as Jacobson was speaking to him, it came out that this man is a Holocaust survivor. And in the Holocaust, he got very angry at God, got very angry at Judaism, and he decided he'll retain the Yiddish culture, but he's not going to have anything to do with Judaism. And in this conversation with Jacobson, a friendship flourished. And then at one point, Jacobson brought in a pair of tefillin and said, "Maybe you want to do the mitzvah of tefillin." And he cried. And he said, I'm going to give up Judaism, but in honor of you, I'll do it. And as soon as he put on the tefillin, Jacobson's foot started to heal. So he saw that the divine providence was there for that. But then there was another story. He had a stroke. He actually recovered very nicely from the stroke. And the story is quite an interesting story. And that's what the Rebbe says. When somebody is challenged, you have to be able to find the divine providence. So it's not a punishment. It's putting you in a situation where you're going to have to recall a tremendous amount of energy, but you may not know that you might have to actually call energy for other people.
1989, right before Rosh Hashanah, my father suffered a stroke. He ended up in the hospital. At Rosh Hashanah, when I get a call from Rabbi Leibel Groner, the Rebbe's secretary, the Rebbe wants to see me immediately. The Rebbe came out with a kuntras, with one of the booklets that he had given out the night before. And he said to me, "Das ist für Taten." And then the Rebbe smiled, and he said to me, "Zog dem Taten," in Yiddish, "Tell your father that when he'll finish the mission for which he was sent there, he will be released." Went straight to NYU. I brought the kuntras, and I told my father exactly what the Rebbe had said. I remember my mother started running around.
He was pretty helpless in bed, but I took a pushka and I ran around the whole hospital, and I took money, and I gave the patients money to put into the pushka. But I sent a message to Leibel that please find out, it's mostly goyim there. What do I do? So a message got like 2 minutes later. He called me back. He said, goyim have to give tzedakah. So I just went all over the place and gave tzedakah.
Era em um hospital para operation.
Von dort in diesem Arrest sind sie unterwegs. Auch der macht dort im Hospital. Ich meine, das ist was Doktor. Das war noch viel, das ist nicht wahr. Die Mord ist dort, die Mail, der nicht nicht selber nicht so, das alles nicht zu sagen. Ich sehe, ich hätte das sehen, dass ich selber nicht so bin. Die next in the hospital house, was very Yiddish man.
Well, we've just started walking about now on the Shabbos.
But you can invite your own patient to him in
Well, I'll have
the,
to.
you can pronounce even the, he has a speech here that he has not pronounced.
No, I'll tell
And
him,
he
yeah.
can, that he can use it in the problem of talking to him in the tour. So the language of his non-speak of stock I think so. Die dort allein dort nicht talking. Sounds like to the noch a Paris mit Kirchen for the
She's being admitted today for surgery tomorrow on the leg.
That's a new surgery. That will be a short area. You have a rocket pushkin, then you'll take it in the hospital.
She has a,
Huh?
she is taking a tzedakah pushka with her in the hospital.
The hospital, yeah, and put the rocket there also. And I've got one matches in the hospital also. Yeah, then you'll have the good news.
My child Mendel is not well. He was in the hospital. So I called up Rabbi Chadakov just to tell him that, I'm going, my little boy's in the hospital, and I'm here in the hospital with him. It goes quiet on the line for a little bit. And then Rabbi Chadakov comes back on the line and he says like this. Sicher hat der Eibishter nicht gemacht, dass der Kind soll sein in Hospital, und du sollst haben Magbas Nefesh. Certainly, the Eibishter didn't make such a thing happen so that you should be anguished because of it. Sicher is dort ein Fran a Schlichus dir zu tun. You certainly have a Schlichus that you have to do there. Geh gefinnes and do us. Go find it and do it.
Right before Yom Kippur, my father did come out from the hospital, and he went by the Rebbe for Lekach.
Mit Michalien, als sein Waffen verwonnen, und als sein Besuch zu Besuch. Ich war jetzt bei einer Anordnung, ich habe wir will alle die Kinder, ich habe lieben, ein guten Weg. Dann haben die Waffen verwonnen.
So wherever you find yourself, whether it's, they said, in a beautiful place or a hospital, God leads the footsteps of a person, and you're going to have to figure out, understand what is the mission of why God put me in this place. There's a reason I'm here, and I have to redeem it and find the reason and the purpose, the mission of my being there.
So the idea is that it's a different kind of attitude rather than being a person focused on why am I having misery, why am I suffering, and why is this happening to me and that. Perhaps I'm an agent from God to bring light to someone else. And the only way that I can actually meet this person is through this kind of situation. So that's another thing. We're going to go on with it, and we're going to go to something which is called bitachon. So there's two words for faith. Usually we use the word emunah. Emunah means to have faith in God. I believe in God. But the truth of the matter is that faith is not as solid. Faith means I believe something. Doesn't mean that you're going to do something because you believe it. So the Rebbe would always talk about the difference between trust and faith. Trust becomes your foundation, your platform that you stand on. It is so firm that you trust it and therefore you'll do it. The Rebbe would always point to the American currency where it doesn't say, in God I believe. It says, in God we trust. Trust is much more than belief. What does trust mean? Trust means you surrender to God and you have such trust in God that you know that He's in charge and that He will do what has to be done. And it brings out a positivity. And as the Rebbe said many times, that the trust itself brings about God's blessings. So I'll tell you two stories. One is a story with the Tzemach Tzedek, and one is a personal story. Story with the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, was that there was a couple that they had a son, and the son got very ill. And he was so ill that the doctors said that his chances for survival were nil. So the father immediately hurried off to the town of Lubavitch, where the third Chabad Rebbe lived. And he got permission to come in, and he burst out crying. And the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe, looked at him, and without saying words, but the look was like, what happened to you if you had all of this education and knowledge, and all of a sudden you lost it? And he said the following statement in Yiddish: Tracht gut wird sein gut. Tachshov tov v'yeh tov. Think positively and it will be good. And all of a sudden, the man became so calm, and he surrendered to God, and he said, it'll be good. And the whole crowd left him. And when he came home, he found that his son was totally well. Trust doesn't mean that we're guaranteed how the outcome is going to come. You don't know. Trust means that you trust that whatever the outcome is, you're going to do whatever you can, but the outcome is going to be in the hands of God. If he wants the person to live, they'll live. If he doesn't, they're not going to live. That's the idea of trust. My wife and I went through a very difficult time with one of our children. He lives here in Charlotte, when he was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and it was very severe. He was in Israel at the time. We spoke to the doctors here, we spoke to doctors in Israel, and the kind of AML that he had, which the slides were coming back, they said he has very slim chances. We made the decision to bring him home from Israel, take him to Duke. And I remember sitting with my wife that night, and we were in shock. We were like paralyzed. We made a decision. And the decision was, we're going to do everything humanly possible that we can. We're not going to leave a stone unturned to get the best medical help, no matter what it takes, and to explore and to investigate and push. But whatever is not in our control, we surrender to God. We can only do what we can control. What's beyond our control, Hashem will do. That's the idea of bitachon. And the bitachon itself becomes the channel. We don't know what the outcome will be. It's not about the outcome. But you do know that God is with you and you're never alone. And the Rebbe was very, very strong on this concept of bitachon. Let's give a look at page 67. This is from an English correspondence of the Rebbe. The Rebbe writes, it's text 5. I duly received a telephone message as well as a letter regarding your state of health. From what I have been informed about your progress in matters of Jewish observance, it is surely unnecessary to emphasize to you the importance of bitachon, complete faith and trust in God, not just as an abstraction, but in a way that truly permeates one entire being. In addition to bitachon being one of the foundations of our faith and way of life, it is also a channel to receive God's blessings, especially for the success of medical treatment. So this is an important thing. You can't get through life. So it's not just that it's a good ingredient. This is the reality. We're going to see in the next video how the Rebbe was emphasizing that to people.
יום אחד אני מקבל מכתב מהבית, שאבא קיבל התקפת לב, והוא במצב אנוש. ואני מקבל מכתב כזה, מה אני צריך לחשוב? כן? אז אני הכנסתי מכתב לרבי, כבר אינני יודע מה לחשוב. אז הרבי לקח את המכתב הזה, עשה קו מתחת למילים האלה, והוא כותב, ולפלא, 3 סימני קריאה ככה, אתה רואה את העוצמה שבזה ככה, ולפלא, שהרי ידוע בכגון דע, ציווי נישואינו רבותינו, טראכט גוט ווערט זיין גוט, ואחכה לבשורות טובות. קיבלתי את המכתב הזה, ידעתי שאבא שלי חי, טוב, המשכתי להגיד תהילים וכן הלאה. זה יום חמישי בלילה. עובר את השבת, ביום ראשון עזרתי אומץ וטלפנתי הביתה. אמא שלי מרימה את הטלפון, שאלתי אותה מה שלום, אבא יצא מכלל סכנה. עברתי את הכביש והלכתי במינכה שם, ואמרתי שהרבי יוצא ממינכה. נו, הראתם שטויבס פמיר? אמרתי לו, כן, יצא מכלל סכנה. מתי? אמרתי לו, ביום חמישי בערב. אז הוא שואל אותי, מתי אתה התחלת לחשוב טוב?
לא היו לנו ילדים כמה שנים, דבר שמאוד מאוד כאב לי. וזה היה עם דיאגנוזה של רופא שטען שאני לעולם לא אוכל, מבחינה ביולוגית, אני לא אוכל ללדת ילדים. אמרתי לבעלי שאני רוצה לנסוע לרבי. אמרתי לרבי שאני רוצה ילדים. בכיתי הרבה. הרבי הסתכל עליי ואומר לי, הייתכן שבחורה שלמדה בבית יעקב תולה תקווה אך ורק ברפואה הקונבנציונלית, הוא עושה לי כך, ואפסה תקווה מן השמיים, ומן הראוי שישבו וילמדו את ספר חובת הלבבות, שער הביטחון, ולא יצטרכו יותר לבכות. והקדוש ברוך הוא יברך אותם בבנים ובנות חסידיים, יראי שמיים, ויזכו לגדלם לתורה, לחופה ולמעשים טובים.
God Almighty bless you to God for strength and partners, and today seems to have more talking. God Almighty and to have more bracha for God Almighty. More talking to have more talking. At least you can swallow it, not my residence.
עכשיו, אנחנו ישבנו ולמדנו, והייתה תקופה שגם נתתי הרצאות לקבוצות על ביטחון בהשם. וכמובן שזה חיזק אותי מאוד, והבכי כבר נגמר, לא הייתי צריכה לבכות, וגם הקדוש ברוך הוא עזר מיד.
God Almighty bless you that you more need to be talking because you have it in charity.
אז הרב אומר לי, נו, soll doch noch einmal nicht treffen, solche Sachen, das wissen alle Menschen zu trachten gut.
So, there were times that the Rebbe actually, there's another story, and we don't have the video here. And that was that there was a story in Toronto with a baby that got burned. And the doctor said it was very difficult. And the Rebbe said that they should have a Kiddush on Shabbat to celebrate his recovery. And they said he's so sick, but they had the Kiddush and everything went well. I want to read one more, and then we're going to go to the doctors, because we haven't talked about doctors yet. That's also a very interesting point. Page 68, text 6. There is no basis for despondency or despair, for we have clearly seen God perform nature-transcending miracles, even for individuals, especially in recent years. Moreover, in many instances, doctors err in their diagnosis, despite conducting a plethora of tests. This is especially true of diagnoses related to internal organs. In addition to all the above, you should be aware that new medical remedies are constantly appearing. However, it is of utmost necessity, it is impossible for it to be otherwise, that you strengthen your connection with God, the healer of flesh, the performer of wonders. This description is to be taken literally. God performs actual miracles and wonders for individuals, the proof being that each and every one of us recites this blessing, and if it were untrue, we would be erring reciting a formal blessing in vain. What is the Rebbe saying over here? Sometimes somebody gets a diagnosis and they just fall apart. And the Rebbe says you can change the diagnosis through your positive thinking. Things can happen. Not that you should rely on miracles. We're soon going to see that the Rebbe says you have to listen to the doctor. And in fact, some of the statements that we're soon going to see, I think every doctor can hang up in their office because it's a Torah command that you have to listen to the doctor. But at the same time, it has to be done with joy. Give a look in text 7 on page 70. I've just received your letter in which you describe your present poor state of health. It might seem logical to delay celebrating your recovery with overjoy until you're actually healed. Nevertheless, it is in fact reasonable to openly rejoice over your healing in advance, despite the reality that your healing has yet to occur, for such joy will actively hasten your recovery. This is in keeping with the oft-repeated Yiddish saying from Chabad Rebbe's, Tracht gut wird sein gut, think positively, and you will receive positive results. Obviously, this approach is far more effective when you translate optimistic thinking into verbalized joy and joyful activity. So the Rebbe was of the opinion that a person is in charge of their destiny. And if they think positive, they become a channel for positive results. Now we're going to go to the doctors, because someone will say, if that's the case, I'll rely on miracles. Why do I have to go to doctors? So the Rebbe says the doctor is God's agent for healing. If we do everything according to Torah, and there are religions that say just pray and don't go to the doctor. And what does Judaism have to say to it? And Judaism says there's a partnership between the medical professionals and God. They become the conduit through which it comes. Where is it all sourced? It's sourced in the Torah portion that we just read this past Saturday. In the long Aliyah, it says Varape Yerape. In one of the Aliyahs in Parshas Mishpatim, it says if someone was hurt, there's going to be the healer will heal. So he says, the Torah says he shall provide for his cure. If somebody beat up somebody else, he's liable for damages. And part of it is he has to pay his medical expenses. But the Torah says not if he chooses, but he must go to the doctor and get healed, and the assailant has to pay the medical bills. So the Medrash says this informs us that God has granted physician permission to provide healing. Why do I say that? Because some people will say, if God gave me an illness, it means God wants me to have the illness. Why should I change the trajectory? Why should I change what God gave me? Who am I to mix into what God does? And the Torah says it's not so. Sometimes God gives you a challenge, but he also gives you the remedy. And the remedy comes through the physician. And you have to go to the physician and you have to follow the orders of the physician. There was someone that was very lax in listening to the doctor. So the Rebbe wrote him a very strong letter, page 72. You should observe our sages directed to follow your doctor's orders and do it happily. What difference does it make to you if you fulfill God's will in a particular way or through particular means? In other words, someone will say, I'll keep God's Torah only through keeping Shabbat or kosher. He says, going to the doctor is also keeping God's way. The main thing is to avoid overthinking the matter and to instead focus on God's will. In this case, God has directed you to obey your doctor, so you should do so and be gratified that you have the opportunity to fulfill God's will, and you should therefore do it with joy. In fact, when you will act in this manner, God will help you so that you will clearly see gratifying results. I hope you will write back to inform me that you have adopted this approach, and may God add his blessings to you and your family for good health and livelihood. Now, we're soon going to see that the Rebbe in some cases wanted there should be two medical opinions and so on and so forth. We'll get there in a minute. But from the religious perspective, it was actually mandatory to go and visit the doctor and listen to the doctor. So the Rebbe said, following the doctor's orders is following God's wish. Yet on the other hand, we have a phenomena today, which the Rebbe foresaw in the early years, that today when someone is diagnosed with an illness, they go to the doctor, then they sit down on the computer, go to the internet, go on every medical website, and they become obsessed with it. They want to try to figure it out on their own. they become self-diagnosticians, and they're totally obsessed with it. And the Rebbe did not like that. Even before there was internet, how much more so today? So let's see what the Rebbe writes about that. This is a very powerful letter. I am pained to hear that you're spending all your time running frantically to doctors. In other words, I didn't have this doctor, I have that, another doctor, a third doctor, reading all medical articles. I'm astonished at your husband as well. What is the justification for this misuse of the trade of alacrity? Alacrity is generally a beneficial quality, but panic is always a fault. Anyways, alacrity is not always appropriate. You should be filled with faith and trust in God, who creates and sustains and animates the entire universe and all of its contents, and even more particular attention to each Jew, being that they are members of the nation that is close to him. Trust that he will provide you with good health, and together with your husband, you will raise your son to Torah, to marriage and good deeds. True, it is always necessary to follow natural channels. You must consult a doctor and follow their instructions. However, totally engrossing yourself in this matter, immersing yourself in medicine and medical matters, and intensely deliberating and debating the exact reasons for the doctor's opinion is not your role. That is exclusively the realm of medical professionals performing their duties as the Torah directs. He should administer healing. Everyone else needs to use the intelligence and mental skills with which God has blessed him for the alternative concerns, some for Torah study and mitzvah observance, others for conducting material affairs that will be able to be transformed into mitzvah-based undertakings. But anxiety, worry, and dejection serve only to weaken your physical and spiritual health. I just have to put it into context that the Rebbe was writing to individuals, each one with their own problem. So when you see somebody that's obsessed and constantly talking about their medical issue and magnifying it and making it a who knows what it is and debating this and that and looking at what this doctor says, that doctor says, the Rebbe says, take it easy. That's not your job. You'll be fine. Don't obsess about it. And this is the problem. When someone has an illness, they constantly feel sick and they constantly feel that they can't be productive. And that is absolutely wrong. Sure.
I'm trying to understand. I'm teaching this tomorrow, but I want to try to understand what the Rebbe just said now. And like you described earlier about when you had a child that was ill, and I know how much you were like analyzing, trying to understand what each doctor said and trying to come up with a path to go on. So how do you distinguish when to delve into the medical part and when to just say, whatever the doctors say, we trust and we're going to follow that and believe it?
I want to repeat the question for the benefit, because having been there, I can answer that question. And the question is, it sounds a little confusing that on the one hand, when you're facing a major medical issue, you just don't want to take the pat answer of the doctor and do it. You really want to study it. And then on the other hand, here the Rebbe says not to obsess. So you have to understand that everything is in balance. And even when we faced it, we discussed it. We did a little research. We did all the research we had to do. Once we got there, we made the decision and we didn't look back. And we went with faith. What the Rebbe is talking about here is people that even after make the decision, they second guess themselves and they obsess with it. And you can't continue living that way. Once we made the decision on what path we go, or every time there was a new dilemma that came before us, we lived with that decision. So yes, we do all of the research, but it doesn't mean that we were obsessed with it day and night. We weren't. I have a little secret to tell you. When my son was in the hospital getting the treatment, what was I doing the rest of the day? Sitting by his bed. There was no one else there. My wife and I would rotate. 1 week I was there, 1 week she was there. That's when I raised the money for the first building. I raised it from the hospital, sitting next to him, and I didn't tell anyone where I was. They thought I was in my office. So even though we, at the same time, researched everything, but we didn't allow it to control our lives. We still felt we had to be productive. And actually, it was very good for Vincent because he would want to know how much progress we make and all of that. One other thing, and then I want you to see a video of a lady from South Africa that had an interesting situation. Because doctors too need to realize, I remember one time in 770, the main synagogue, somebody passed out and there were doctors there and the Rebbe called them over to ask what the condition is. and they said, it doesn't look like he's going to survive. And the Rebbe admonished them and said, that's not your job. Your job is not to talk about their demise. Your job is to heal them and to find ways to heal. We're soon going to see a story about that. As requests were coming in, and after the Rebbe's wife passed away, the Rebbe said he doesn't want to handle all the questions. So give a look at page 75, text 11. The Rebbe said that my general response to questions regarding medical matters is that one should follow the advice of an expert doctor. It is best to consult with two experts, and when there is a difference of opinion, one should ask a third and follow the majority position. Now, I have to say that until that answer, it was very common that the Rebbe would take upon himself and give medical and say what it should be done. And there are many, many stories about that. Here we'll find a story that happened in South Africa. So if you're up to it, if you can watch the video.
Esty Ash lives in Johannesburg, South Africa, with her family.
Kids were older. They were all avid bike riders. Uriel went outside. He was going up the road. He didn't take his helmet. And he was riding in the street. And a car, it was a very narrow street with cars parked on both sides, and a car was obviously trying to get through. With Uriel in the street, he couldn't, so he hooted at Uriel. Uriel turned around to look at the car, and as he turned his bike in front of the car as well, and the car hit him. And he flew off his bike over the hood of the car and smashed the windscreen with his head. The ambulance came to take us, and I was asking them questions, and they didn't answer me, and he was unconscious. There was no response. When we got to the hospital, they took Uriel away to try to resuscitate him, and they sent me to fill in the form. And one of the questions on the form is age. Now, this was a week before Uriel's 14th birthday, but I desperately needed 14, so I didn't write 13. I wrote 14, even though he was technically still 13. I needed that 14, so I wrote 14, and that became relevant later too. They called me in to talk to him and hold his hand and see if it would elicit a reaction, and it didn't. A lady came, she gave me some money to make a phone call, and I phoned Michael, and Michael's my husband, and I made it sound like it wasn't serious. And he came to the hospital, and then they called us both in to see if we could get a reaction out of Uriel, hold his hand, stroke his head, talk to him. There was nothing. And I think when Michael realized the gravity of the situation, he phoned Rabbi Lipsker, who was a close friend of ours. He phoned the Rebbe's office for a bracha, and also because there was no reaction from Uriel, the doctor in charge, the registrar in charge of trauma, casualty, had decided that they weren't going to take any active medical care as far as he was concerned. They were just going to leave him. And then came the Rebbe's bracha. The Rebbe basically said, Askir al Atzion, we should hear Basuras Tovos. And there was a specific message to the doctor saying that he is a rofeh, and as a rofeh, a doctor, he is a shaliach of Hashem. And his job is to administer treatment and do whatever he can, and Hashem will decide the outcome. And as a result of that, he decided to go against the instructions of his superior doctor and administer treatment. So they took Uriel, they didn't even put him in ICU because they weren't going to bother doing anything with him, but they put him in a normal ward. Now, the best ward in the hospital was the pediatric ward, and the maximum age for the pediatric ward is 13. But I'd written 14 on the form. But Gary Schwartz, the doctor, knowing that this was the best ward in the hospital, put him into the pediatric ward. And against the instructions of his superior doctor, he put him on a respirator. And administered whatever medical treatment he could for Uriel to save his life. Early the next morning, at about 6, Uriel came to. And all I could say is that it was seeing the Nefesh Elokis at work, because with his eyes still closed, he did this, and he did this. He wanted Negovas. I mean, he had just come round. It was amazing. And when the doctor in charge came to do his rounds and he saw that Uriel was wide awake, I think he learned a very big lesson. But as for Gary, this was the first step in his journey to becoming frum. He had witnessed a miracle.
So the point is, before we go to the final part of the lesson, the point is that it's a partnership between God and the doctor. And therefore, the Rebbe said the doctor is called a roife. You have to do whatever you can to heal. You don't give up. And in this case, it was a perfect example of trying to help this person. And thank God the boy came too. But what does it mean from us? It means from us is that there are a lot of things we don't understand. And we can't take anything on face value. We understand what we've learned until now, that when these things happen as part of the divine plan, sometimes it could be the divine providence when we find ourselves at a place which we didn't, and through that, there are things that happen. And sometimes it's just for ourselves, or in this case, the doctor himself, who was Jewish, as a result of this particular case, changed his own life, and he became observant. It actually happened with the Rebbe himself. The Rebbe suffered a heart attack on Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeret of 1977. And he had Dr. Ira Weiss. We're soon going to see a picture of him. And Dr. Ira Weiss was a cardiologist that flew in from Chicago. And then he had another doctor by the name of Dr. Larry Resnick. Dr. Larry Resnick was actually an endocrinologist, but also a cardiologist. And he came from a traditional Jewish family, but he didn't keep anything. And he became the resident doctor by the Rebbe. He was a brilliant man. And throughout the Rebbe's recovery in that first year, he spent a lot of time with the Rebbe alone, walking with him, talking to him, and it changed his life. And he established a family. He got married to another returnee, Molly Resnick. I don't know if you've heard the name. She was an NBC reporter and producer and Jewish. She was actually Israeli. And they established a beautiful family. Their oldest son is the rabbi near San Francisco, in that area, who does fantastic stuff. It was all through this influence. We don't understand why. But nevertheless, everything has purpose. So let's go to the lesson, then we're going to study the Rambam. How to remain emotionally positive when facing a medical challenge. Let's give a look at the screen. Keep yourself as productive as possible. Identify a spiritual mission within the challenge and focus on completing it. Have faith in God. Those are things that are very, very important. Now, we're going to say that the physical impacts the spiritual. This goes from the other side, because we're addressing now, people might say, if I want to be spiritual, what do I need to take care of my body? Story told of a very pious man that he didn't want to waste time on physical activity. So he ate very little, he slept very little, and he studied and studied and studied. By the time he was 60, he was very, very ill because he never took care of his body. And at that point, he said, through my spiritual ascendancy, I've realized the preciousness of the body, that the body is the only instrument and tool through which you can perform Torah and mitzvahs. But by that time, it was too late because he was so sick, he couldn't do it. So what does the Rambam say? Very famous Rambam. Page 77, text 12. Maintaining a healthy and sound body is among the ways of serving God, for one cannot properly understand and have knowledge of the Creator when ill. Therefore, one must avoid that which harms the body and accustom oneself to that which is helpful and helps the body become stronger. So we're looking at all gamuts of it. The body is very, very important. Now, It doesn't mean that we worship the body. It doesn't mean that the body becomes the most important. Remember the very beginning tonight, we spoke about form and matter, and I gave an example of a car. If somebody invests a lot in their car, but the car doesn't do the transportation, but they have the best tires and they have the best seats and the best snazziest thing, but it doesn't really drive well, it doesn't do what it has to do, then what use do they have from it? Another thing that we have to realize is that the health of the physical body is also not determined by handicaps or not. So I want to share a story with you that has been, I've repeated it a few times, so I beg those that heard it once before forgiveness, but it's a very powerful story. In 1976 was the bicentennial year of the United States. A lot of you remember that. And there was a very big celebration at the Statue of Liberty. That was also the day that the Israelis raided Entebbe and rescued the hostages. There was a busload of Israeli soldiers that were called the Nechei Tzahal. They were the handicap of Tzahal. They were wounded in action. And they had arranged to come and have a meeting with the Rebbe in the synagogue. And they came. They were not religious necessarily, and they sat in the audience. The Rebbe came out and gave them a talk in Hebrew. And that's when the Rebbe said that he would like they should change their name from the handicap to the exceptional. Because the physical handicap doesn't make them less human. One of the soldiers that was sitting there was somebody that lost both legs in battle. And he was in a wheelchair. He could only move himself with his hands using the wheels. And he said that that encounter with the Rebbe, because the Rebbe went down afterwards and gave everyone, shook everybody's hand, gave them $1 for stock, and gave them an individual blessing. When the Rebbe came by him, you know what the Rebbe said? Let's see what you remember what the Rebbe said. The Rebbe said to him specifically, thank you for what you have done for the Jewish people and what you've done for the land of Israel. It is so appreciated. And all of a sudden, that was a game changer for him. He said when he was injured, he was totally blacked out. He was in the hospital. He wakes up and he didn't know what the extent of his injury. And he says, I want to move my legs. And he couldn't move his legs. So he looks down and he sees he doesn't have any legs. They amputated it. And then his father came to visit him in the hospital, and his father couldn't look him in the eyes. His father was looking to the side. They all felt like he was a half human. They couldn't relate to him. And then finally, when he came out of the hospital, he was in a wheelchair. Wherever he went, people were walking or looking the other way. They didn't want to go next to him. He felt as if he was some sort of different kind of creature. So when he joined this group because they all came to have a good time. He says the first one that restored humanity to him, and not only humanity, but recognized him as a hero, was the Rebbe. Because the Rebbe looked him in the eyes with a smile and he said, thank you for what you've done for the Jewish people. Thank you for what you've done for the land of Israel. And he said it so inspired him that he made a decision right then and there that nothing will stand in the way for him to succeed. And he went to school. He became a business executive. He has a very upscale office in Tel Aviv, even though he's still in a wheelchair moving around. He runs a very big company, and he says, nothing stops me. And if you ask me what changed in my life, was those words, thank you for what you did for the Jewish people. Rather than seeing me as a cripple or a handicap, I was seen as a hero. So the idea is, it just depends the attitude that we have. Now, there are people that neglect their body when they get sick and they don't take care of it. Some people do it in the name of spirituality. Some people say, since the form is over matter, the form has to subdue the matter, so the soul has to be more powerful than the matter. Okay, so let's see the next text. Next text, page 78, text 13. The Rebbe says, I'm pained to hear that you feel that your health has noticeably declined. I'm also paid to hear that you're not careful to follow your doctor's directives. I've heard directly from my saintly father-in-law, the Rebbe, that his own father, the Rebbe Rashab, said, look how precious the body is to God. The Jewish body is to God. He provided it with so much just for its sake, as it's known that God specifically chose to give his Torah mitzvahs to souls that are housed in the corporal bodies and not to angels. Now, if the Creator considers the body to be so precious, we must be exceptionally careful to take good care of this treasure deposit that God entrusted us. I want to play 2 more videos, and then if we have time, we'll read the rest of it.
That was July 1989. I wasn't feeling well. I had pains in my stomach. And I went to my gastroenterologist, who was a big mumcha, and he took an endoscopy. And he's straightforward. He says, I got very bad news to tell you. I said, well, what? And you got a big problem. You got to go get x-rays and everything, and you have to have an operation on your stomach, otherwise you're in dire sakana. I called the 770. Benjamin Klein answered the phone. And Benjamin went into the Rebbe, and he came right back and called me up, but the Rebbe said that I should look over all my mezuzahs that was in this house, and my Rashi's film, and Rabbeinu Tam's film. And I went over to the Sefer. So he takes out the Parsha, and he shows me that it's the word Zoch and Zikaron was blotted out. You can't use these film, he says. He had just written 4 Pashas for Shel Rosh, so I bought it from another spot because I didn't want to be without film. And Baruch Hashem, I had the operation, and everything was all right. And I called Benjamin to thank the Rebbe, that the Rebbe saved my life. So the Rebbe said to him, this is the refuah.
אני יכול לנצל ולבקש את ברכתך לקצין שנמצא אצלי במשלחת וקיבל לו עלינו שיתוק, שמו עודד יונה בן שרה.
רציתי ברכה בשבילו, וכדאי שיבדקו התפילין שלו, וזה יש לי בביטחון. ברכה והצלחה.
תודה רבה, תודה רבה.
כאן איננו מובן ביוחס ביטחון גשמי, אבל מובן ביוחס ביטחון רוחני. בשורות טובות.
Rabbi, in the last about 2.5 years, I've got a pain in my body, like in my muscles, like a stiffness that moves around. I've been to doctors and the Abishus to Duncan, they've said there's nothing wrong with this or that, but I still get the pains from time to time. Could I ask you as well, Rabbi, if you don't mind, if I could have a bracha for that? It's been about 2.5 years.
Probably you must do something about the kashrus, about the observing the laws of kashrus. Maybe there is something wrong with Chol Yisrael or Pas Yisrael.
העיניים שלי מאוד מאוד חלשות העיניים, ואני מבקשת ברכה לרפואה שלמה.
אני צריך לזרוע בקידוש ובהבדלה.
Okay, so the Rebbe felt that the Torah is a channel, and it was very common, and when someone died with an illness, the Rebbe would say that they should make sure that their tefillin, their mezuzot are kosher. Remember I mentioned this doctor from Israel, from Sheba Hospital, that the Rebbe told him that he should change the name of the hospital. Here's an interview with him, which is very, very important. It's not long. And he brings out an insight of the Rebbe's view on medicine, which I thought is actually powerful. Speaks in Hebrew, but
Professor Mordechai Shani serves as Professor of Healthcare Systems at Tel Aviv University and is a recipient of the Israel Prize. In 1976, while serving as Director General of the Sheba Medical Center, he was part of a group that arrived at 770 for the celebration of Simchas Torah.
הרבי הגיע אלינו, שוחח עם כל אחד מאיתנו,
כדקה. מאחר והוא שאל אותי מאיפה אני, וסיפרתי לו שבאתי מבית חולים, הוא מיד שאל אותי מדוע אתם קוראים לזה בית חולים ולא בית רפואה, ואמר לי, אתה יודע מה, בהזדמנות בוא ניפגש ונשוחח יותר בשקט ובניחותא. כעבור בערך שנה, אינני זוכר את התאריך המדויק, בתיאום עם הרב קליין נקבעה פגישה עם הרבי. הפגישה הייתה בחדרו, חדר צנוע, שמתאים לאישיותו של הרבי. היא לא עסקה בנושאים אישיים. היא עסקה למעשה בשיחה בערך של כחצי שעה, 25 דקות, שדנה למעשה בעולם הרפואה. ראשית, אחד הדברים המעניינים, שגם מאפיינים את הרבי, שהוא שם דגש על נפשו של האדם, וראה בנושא הנפש מקור לחוזקו של האדם. ככל שהאדם בעל נפש חזקה יותר, הוא יכול להתמודד יותר טוב בחיים. הגענו דרך אגב לשיחה גם על ביקורי אנשים אצל חולים, והוא הדגיש את החשיבות של זה, לא רק מבחינת זו שאתה בא לבקר חולה, אלא בזה שאתה בא לחזק אותו. אתה נותן לו תחושה שהוא איננו לבד, שזה אחד הדברים היפים בקהילה החרדית, שבו הקהילה עוזרת לאדם החולה ומחזקת את נפשו. בהמשך דיברנו על נושא נוסף, שהוא גם כן מאוד מעניין, כי הוא מתקשר למגמה שיש היום ברפואה, וזה נושא מקומו של האדם בבריאותו. אמר הרבי, נכון שיש רופאים, אבל הוא אמר משהו שהיום מתחילים לדבר על זה, שבאים ונסים לשכנע את בני האדם, אל תתלה את יהבך ברופאים, אם אתה לא תדאג לבריאותך, אם אתה לא תקפיד לאכול נכון, להתעמל, לישון טוב, אתה תפגע בבריאותך. זהו נושא שהיום בעולם המערבי קוראים לו patient empowerment. חזק, תעצים את האדם ותשכנע אותו שהוא אחראי לבריאותו. מעניין שהרבי לפני 30 שנה כבר מדבר על העצמת האדם, שהאדם הוא אחראי לבריאותו. הרי זה כלל בסיסי במה שנקרא רפואה מונעת וקידום בריאות. אתה אחראי לבריאותך, הרופא יכול לעזור לך, הוא לא יכול להחליף אותך. מבחינה זו, השיחה הייתה מאוד מעניינת, כי הרבי בכמה נושאים למעשה הקדים את זמנו. אפרופו דרך אגב, הסוגיה שהוא התחיל איתי בפגישה הראשונה, למה הוא קורא בית רפואה? אומר הרבי, אתם שמים דגש על החולי, אני שם את הדגש על הבריאות. אני רוצה להדגיש שאתם הולכים למקום שרוצה לשפר את הרפואה שלכם, את הבריאות שלכם, לא את החולי שלכם. זה מתקשר בדיוק לתפיסה של הרבי, שבא ואמר, רבותיי, הבריאות תלויה בך. אל תקדש את החולי, תקדש את הבריאות.
Very powerful. So I'm skipping a bunch of readings, but that's okay. Remember, I spoke about Dr. Weiss, and then I spoke about Dr. Resnick. So there's 2 readings, and with that, we'll finish. If you can open up to page 81. First, he wrote a letter to Dr. Weiss. On behalf of Mrs. Schneerson, as well as my own behalf, I wish to convey our sincere appreciation for your kind and considerate care in connection to the recent incident that occurred with Mrs. Schneerson. It doesn't say what it was. Thank you for your immediate response and home visitation at an inconvenient hour. And all this in addition to having provided with your expert and skilled treatment and care. I surely need not stress to you how important it is to the patient that the doctors expresses personal interest and attention, particularly as this constitutes a significant aspect in the patient's healing. As you yourself correctly noted in the course of our conversation, the mind has a critical degree of influence over the entire body, and one state of mind directly affects the healing process. We extend our thanks and anticipation as well of your continued interest and assistance. I hope and pray that God, the healer of all flesh and performer of wonders, will bless you with success regarding your patients, including the present one. Now, the one other thing that the Rebbe wrote in 1955 to a conference of Orthodox Jewish physicians, and that's on page 7, and I think that this is the finale for this particular class. It is very, very powerful. The more deeply one delves into science, The stronger must grow the recognition of the truth of the fundamental principles, as well as the details of our Jewish religion. As physicians, in particular, you are in a position to refute decisively the path of materialism, as it is demonstrated by the fact that so much of the physical health depends on spiritual health. If in the past emphasis was placed on a healthy spirit and a healthy body, in our days it is an accepted principle that even a small spiritual defect causes grievous physical harm. The healthier the spirit and the greater the influence of the physical body, the greater its ability to correct or overcome physical shortcomings. This is to the extent that even some physical treatments have a much greater impact and benefit on the body's healing when joined by the patient's determination, their willpower, and the strength of soul. Now, I want to just say that one of the things that I've been amazed since October 7th, as we all know that there is a war in Israel, is that there are Israeli soldiers that are being wounded in action with serious wounds, and they end up in the hospital. But you know what they do right after that? As soon as they have the ability, they go right back to join their unit. And instead of using it as an excuse to say, I'm exempt, I can't do it anymore, they don't even think that way. They're so caught up with the spirit of defending the land of Israel, with the spirit of camaraderie, the spirit that they can do, that they're walking out with unbelievable elation, even though they were wounded. And you see these videos all the time. And this is basically what it's saying here. What I want to take out of this class is, one of the things that I think personally, is that we have this tendency that we get weighted down whenever there is illness and we have reasons to be depressed and we feel like we can't carry on. And the opposite should be true. We have to have a fiery spirit to go forth. Yes, we have to go to the doctor, we have to get healed, we have to do what's right, but it doesn't stop us because we have the ability to overcome that. And if we do that, then we're healthy by ourselves. Thank you very, very much. That's the advice for life. Very good.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much. It's good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks. Thank you very much for joining.
Mom, she's not even there anymore.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.